what do you do when your life turns upside down? What do you do when your entire existence goes from one way to completely different overnight? Has that happened to you? Has that ever happened to you where your life just completely flips and changes? Okay? We're entering into a sermon series that I'm calling Storms, and so we're going to look at different storms in our life. But I want to tell you about the time that my life completely changed, basically overnight. And you've probably heard this story, but it is so relevant to what we're talking about today in that how does God bring us through situations. So when I was 23 years old, I was a young, strapping young lad, and I got married to my wife. So here's a picture of me at 23. Look at that guy. Doesn't he look good? Look at the girl that he managed to marry. Isn't that great? Wow. But that's a good, healthy-looking kid right there, right? 23 years old, in the prime of his life. You know, he can run like a 4.8 40. I mean, he can bench like 190, 200, 225, something like that. He's strong. That's a strong, strapping lad right there, okay? So we got married in May of 2014. I'm 23, and that is exactly what I look like. That's a picture from my wedding. If you fast forward to December, this is what I looked like in December of 2014. So I had lost, I went from weighing 190. You can't really tell in that picture, but it's awful. I'm skin and bones. I went from weighing 190 to 6 months later weighing 130 in 6 months. And so, I had kind of realized that I was losing weight. My pants didn't fit anymore. I went from being a 32 in the waist to dropping all the way down to about a 28 or a 26. And so I was going to work every day, and I realized that the more that I was going to work, the more that I was trying to ratchet in my belt in order just to keep my pants up at work. And so I knew there was something wrong with me, and in fact, I knew that I was dying, and I just didn't want somebody to confirm that for me. I just wanted to go to sleep one night and wake up in heaven. Like, I didn't want somebody to tell me, hey, you're enduring this ordeal, you're dying, there's nothing we can... I didn't want to hear that. And so Robin said, hey, you ought to go to the doctor. And I said, no, I'm not going to the doctor. And, my family said, hey, you ought to go to the doctor. And I said, no, I'm not going to go to the doctor. And Robin's family said, hey, you ought to go to the doctor. And I said, no, I'm not going to the doctor. And my mom said, hey, you ought to go to the doctor. And I said, yes, ma'am. And so that was at Christmas of 2014. And so I made an appointment for January of 2015. And so in less than a month, I went from weighing 130, because we weighed myself at Christmas in order to make that determination, to when they weighed me at the doctor, I was down to 120 in a month. And so I had dropped all the way down to 120 pounds from what I was at. And so we walk into this doctor's office. I bring Robin with me because I know this guy's going to tell me, you've got cancer, you're dying, you've got like 4 days to live. And so, I was going to bring her with me, and we were going to deal with that together. We walk into the room, and the doctor starts doing all the things that doctors do, and they ask you all the questions, and they're going through the litany of problems, and he says, okay, I want you to go and give me a urine sample so that we can kind of run some more tests in order for me to properly diagnose you. And so I get the cup, and I leave the room, and as soon as the door shuts behind me, he looks to Robin, and he says, he's got diabetes. She said, what? How can you tell? And he said, his A1C is so high that he is in diabetic ketoacidosis, and his ketones are so high that I can smell it on his breath just by talking to him. And so he said, we're gonna run all of these tests, but I can tell you right now that he's a type 1 diabetic. And so I come back into the room, and he lets me know that after he had let Robin know that. And then basically this was his diagnosis for me. He says, you're a type 1 diabetic. What that means is that your life will never be the same. He said, what you were doing yesterday, you can no longer do. In fact, today, what I'm going to tell you to do is from now until I tell you differently, the only thing you can eat is meat and green vegetables. You're not allowed to eat any carbohydrates whatsoever. And so I remember leaving that doctor's office just broken. Like, I'm a guy, I wasn't like eating unhealthy, but I'm a guy that likes dessert, right? I'm a guy that at that time, the only thing that I would drink, I was raised here in Bonham, Texas. So the only thing that I would drink was milk, Dr. Pepper, or sweet tea. And my sweet tea is really more like syrup than it is like anything else, right? So I went from being a guy that drank milk, Dr. Pepper, and sweet tea to a guy that drank black coffee, water, and unsweet tea in one doctor's visit. I remember us going to the grocery store, and we walked aisle after aisle after aisle after aisle. Walked every single aisle in that grocery store looking for things that didn't have carbohydrates. You know what we found? One package of tortillas and sugar-free Jell-O. That was it. I can remember going home and just being broken. What happened to me? Because I have the type of diabetes that doesn't happen because you were irresponsible in your life. I was a healthy guy. I was working out all the time. I was eating the way that I was supposed to be eating. I was like taking dietary supplements so that I could be a bodybuilder. I would never achieve that status. But I was trying, right? I'm doing all of these things the way that you're supposed to be doing them. And yet, I got this diabetes. In fact, the type 1 diabetes that I have that you usually find in like 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds. And so my life changed overnight. That was one of the hardest things for me to endure. How do you endure something that completely changes your life overnight? Well, we're going to look at a story today that is this. This guy's life changes overnight. We're going to look at the story of Noah, and I'm going to be up front with you. The story of Noah is 4 chapters in the Bible. And my goal today is to cover this entire story in one blow. So it's going to be really weird as far as the actual reading is concerned. So you can follow me along in your Bible if you want, or I have put the verses that I'm going to read on the screen. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach chapter 6, and then chapter 7, and then chapter 8, and then show you how the story of Noah's life helps us walk through the storm, right? We're looking at this idea of storms in the Bible and how God uniquely orchestrates storms to bring people through onto the other side. How God uniquely uses storms to change people's lives, right? And so that's where we're going to be in Genesis chapter 6 is where I'm going to start. I'm going to start in verse 5. It's really going to be easy if you just follow it on the screen. But it says, when the Lord saw that human wickedness was widespread on the earth, and that every inclination of the human mind was nothing but evil all the time, the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and he was deeply grieved. And then the Lord said, I will wipe mankind whom I created off the face of the earth, together with the animals and creatures that crawl, and the birds of the sky, for I regret that I made them. Noah, however, found favor with the Lord. And these are the family records of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among his contemporaries. And Noah walked with God. And Noah fathered 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with wickedness. God saw how corrupt the earth was, for every creature had corrupted its way on the earth. And then God said to Noah, I have decided to put an end to every creature, for the earth is filled with wickedness because of them. And therefore I'm going to destroy them along with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, and make rooms in the ark and cover it with pitch on the inside and the outside. Verse 17, and understand that I am bringing a flood waters on the earth, to destroy every creature under heaven with the breath of life in it. And everything on earth will perish, but I will establish my covenant with you. And you are also to enter the ark with your sons and your wife and your sons' wives. And you are also to bring the ark with you 2 of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you. Verse 22, and Noah did this. He did everything that God had commanded him. So that's chapter 6. It's a lot going on in this chapter. You know, it says that God noticed that human wickedness was widespread on the earth, and so his solution was just to wipe out his creation. Now, what's interesting about the Bible, to be honest with you, is the Bible is built out of Genesis chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3. There is so much of the Bible that refers back to Genesis chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, that it is central to our belief system as followers of God, right? And so Noah's story in chapter 6 is actually an creation event. This is God unmaking his creation. So if you go back to Genesis chapter 1, what we see in Genesis chapter 1 is 6 days of creation, but it's broken up into kind of 2 sets of 3. And so if you go back and you look at the beginning of the Bible, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was formless and waste, or formless and void, and the Spirit of God hovered over the surface of the waters. Those are the first words in the Bible, right? And so what God is doing is he is looking at this formless, chaotic entity. In fact, the Hebrew word there for formless and waste is a really cool phrase. It's tohu vavohu. Formless. Yeah, there you go, Luke. Tohu vavohu. It's formless and void. It's chaos. It's emptiness. It's unformed something. And so the Spirit of God, it says, the Ruach, the Spirit of God, hovers over the surface of the waters. And so God decides that he's going to make order out of this chaos. And so on day 1, he separates the light from the darkness, right? And the light he calls day, and the darkness he calls night. And then on day 2, he separates the water from the water. And so there's a water, some translation, King James says firmament, that was around the world, and then there's waters that existed on the planet. And then on day 3, God separates the water from the dry land. And then that cycle repeats itself because God creates the entities where these things are going to dwell, and then God puts the things that are going to dwell in those entities. And so on day 4, he puts the stars in the sky, and he creates the sun. I don't really understand how he separates darkness from light without a sun, but he does that on day 1. And then on day 4, he creates the things that are going to dwell there. And so he creates the sun and the stars and the moon and all of those things, right? And then on day 5, so day 2, remember, he separates the water from the waters. And so on day 5, he creates the things that are going to dwell there. He creates the fish that are in the sea, and he creates the birds that are in the sky. Those things are going to dwell there. And then on day 6, he mirrors day 3. And so God separated the waters from the earth, from the dry land. And on day 6, he creates the things that are going to dwell there on dry land. He creates animals that live on the land and humanity, right? And so all is good. In fact, when God does it on day 1, he sees that his creation was good. And on day 2, he sees his creation was good. And on day 3, he sees his creation was good. And day 4, he sees his creation was good. And day 5, he sees his creation was good. And day 6, he sees that all that he created was very good, right? That's Genesis chapter 1. That's a flyover. I guess I'm covering all of Genesis 1 through 9 today, so just buckle up. So Genesis chapter 2, he kind of fast forwards, right? And he puts them in the garden to work it and to keep it and to have mastery over it. And he gives them this command. He says, eat, ekol, eat as much as you want. He commands them, eat, enjoy. Do this, eat it in this garden, enjoy it. Just don't eat from that one tree. And then what do they do in chapter 3? They eat from that one daggum tree, right? And so the language that's used there is that Eve sees that the tree is pleasing to her eye and that it's good for food. And so she takes and she eats. And then she gives some to her husband, and he takes and he eats. What happened on day 3 is not that they were disobedient to God, though they were. What happened is that Eve saw that something was good, and so she took it for herself. She saw that something was good, and she took it for herself. And so what happens then in chapter 3 is that they get expelled out of this paradise that God had created. And then in chapter 4, Cain sees that someone someone has something that he wants, so he takes the life of his brother. And then in chapter 5, it talks about this line that's spreading from Adam all the way to Noah. And then in chapter 6, what we see is that there is an entity on the earth. The Bible talks about them as the sons of God. And unless you've got like 4 hours today, I can't cover the Nephilim. All right, that's going to be a whole nother sermon. But basically what happens, and what the language that's used in chapter 6, verses 1 through 5, it says that the Nephilim saw that the daughters of man, the sons of God, saw that the daughters of man were good, and so they took for themselves something that wasn't meant for them. And so what happens is the entire of creation has become corrupted. And so God is seeing his creation, and he's observing that these people are seeing and taking for themselves, and that no one is walking with God except for Noah. And so God sees Noah, and he decides, I'm going to uncreate everything that I've created. Now, on its surface, this can seem like some sort of malicious, malevolent God that's manipulating humanity, and he sees all of these things and they're not doing what he wants them to do, so he's just going to spite the whole race and then just be done with it, right? In fact, there's 4 non-biblical accounts of this flood. Did you know that? Probably don't know that. So we have the biblical account, Noah's flood. And then you've got a Babylonian account of a catastrophic worldwide flood that happens. And you've got another account called the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it talks about a catastrophic worldwide flood that happens. And then you've got 2 other accounts from all over the world. We have these accounts of this catastrophic worldwide flood. And in 4 of those 5, it's because the gods are angry at the people. In one of them, it's kind of funny, the gods look at humanity and they're stinky and they're loud, and so the gods wipe them off of the face of the earth. I don't want to deal with these stinky, loud people anymore, so I'm just going to wipe them off the face of the earth. And there's one guy that happens to get into a cube, and he stays in this cube, and then he comes out the father of all humanity. In another account, the gods determine that humanity is too big of a problem, and so they're going to kill all of humanity, but they have mercy on one because they feel empathetic and bad about this particular character. And so they're going to save him at the expense of everyone else. But the story of Noah is unique in that it's the only story that God provides before the storm. What happens with Noah is that God comes and tells Noah, I'm going to flood the earth, and I need you to build this ark in order to preserve humanity. I want you to create a sanctuary for salvation, that God provides salvation for humanity and for creation. One of the things that I think is really, really interesting about Noah's Ark is that it looks nothing like the storybook thing that you're thinking about right now, right? So when I was a kid, I had a Noah's Ark, like, big wooden boat thing, right? And in my kid Noah's Ark thing, it was this really big boat that had like a cool looking mast, and it had a little cabin on top for Noah to stay in. And Noah, it looks like Noah's kind of like Captain Ahab, and he's just going to go on this seafaring adventure, and he's going to navigate all of these things by himself, right? That's not how the ark is described in the Bible. I didn't read it, but God gives very distinct instructions for this ark. What God describes looks more like a temple than it does like a boat. He basically tells them to build this box. Build me a rectangle that's 75 feet wide and 450 feet long and 45 feet tall, and then get in it. This isn't a seafaring vessel. This is an office building, is what he builds, right? And what I think is interesting is that God provides him the instructions in this, but even more than that, even the word ark I think is interesting. The word ark is the Hebrew word tebah, and it can also be translated as chest or basket. Do you know the next time that we see the word tebah in the Bible? There's a young man named Moses who's a baby. And his mom builds a tebah and puts Moses in it and then puts him in the Nile River. Moses, the baby, cannot navigate the Nile River in an ark. In a basket, he's under the protection of God. And Noah is not Captain Ahab. He's not setting out to navigate the globe. He's getting into a box that God has provided. You know what's also interesting about the Hebrew word tebah? Some writers say that it could be a borrowed word from an Egyptian language, and that word translates as casket. So Noah gets into a casket for a year and is under the provision of God. That God provides for Noah. All right, let's jump into chapter 7, because I'm rapidly running out of time. Chapter 7, verse 1, it says this. Then the Lord said to Noah, enter the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you alone are righteous before me in this generation. Verse 11. And in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, and on that day all the sources of the vast watery depths burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened, and the rain fell on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. And on that same day, Noah and his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, entered the ark along with Noah's wife and his 3 sons' wives. And they entered it with the wildlife according to their kinds, all livestock according to their kinds, all the creatures that crawl on the earth according to their kinds, every flying creature, all the birds, and every winged creature according to their kinds. And 2 of every creature that has breathed life into it came to Noah and entered the ark. Those that entered, male and female of every creature, entered just as God commanded them. And then note this, then the Lord shut him in. Verse 23. He wiped out every living thing that was on the face of the earth, from mankind to livestock to creatures that crawl, to the birds of the sky, and they were wiped off the earth. Only Noah was left, and those that were with him in the ark. And the water surged on the earth for 150 days. All right, so God basically gives Noah 100 years to build this office building, to build this casket that he's going to reside in, right? Because when Noah has Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the Bible tells us in Genesis chapter 5 that Noah was 500 years old when he has those boys, okay? And then Noah says on the whatever month of his 600th year of life, this is crazy, these numbers are crazy. So think 50 and 60 if that helps you. But basically, Noah has a period of 100 years of his life to build this thing. And you know what happens for 100 years? Nobody walks with God. Noah is building an office building in his backyard, and nobody changes their ways. Nobody walks with God. Noah is as removed from Adam as everybody else is. And yet, everyone else is doing what their eyes deem they ought to do. Everyone else sees and takes of themselves. And so what God does is just allow these people to receive what they want to receive anyways. You know, a lot of times we ask the question, and I heard this in a sermon about this very thing this week. A lot of times we ask the question, why won't God intervene in these things? We've got war that's happening in the Middle East. Why won't God just come in and stop the war? We've got people that are stealing money from senior adults every single day. Why won't God just step in and eliminate those people that are stealing from senior adults? The problem is God did that once. And He gave everyone their just desserts for what they were doing. And it results in chapter 7 of Genesis that God floods the entire earth. Because people aren't good. We're not good people. The Bible says that no one is righteous, not even one. And so what God does is God protects. God provides, but God protects. One of my favorite verses of this story is there in chapter 7, verse 16. And all those entered, male and female of every creature, entered just as God had commanded them. And then who? Yahweh shut him in. It's Yahweh's doing. Noah doesn't shut this door and latch it from the inside. Yahweh shuts him in. That's all caps in your Bible. The Lord, Yahweh, shuts him in. God is the one protecting Noah while he's in the casket. God is the one that's protecting Noah while he's in the storm. It's God who is the protector. God provides, God protects, and God pursues. Look at chapter 8. And God remembered Noah, as well as all the wildlife and all the livestock that were with in the ark. And God caused a wind, underline that word wind because you're going to need it, to pass over the earth. And the water began to subside. The sources of the watery depths and the floodgates of the sky were closed, and the rain from the sky stopped, and the water steadily receded from the earth. And by the end of 150 days, the water had decreased significantly, and the ark came to rest on the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, on the mountains of Ariah. Jump down to verse 13. In the 601st year, in the first month, on the first day of the month, the water had covered the earth, was dried up. And then Noah removed the ark's cover and saw that the surface of the ground was drying. And by the 27th day of the second month, the earth was dry. And then God spoke to Noah, "Come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons wives, and bring out all the living creatures that are with you, birds and livestock that crawl on the earth, that they will spread all over the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth." And so Noah, along with his sons and his wife and his sons' wives, came out, and all the animals and all the creatures that crawl and all the flying creatures and everything that moves on the earth came out of the ark by their families. And then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and he took some of every kind of animal, every kind of clean bird, and offered a burnt offering on the altar. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, he said to himself, "I will never again curse the ground because of human beings. Even though the inclination of the human heart is evil from youth onward, I will never again strike down every living thing that I've done." Do you see what happens there? God pursues Noah. The language there at the beginning of chapter 8 and verse 1, it says that God remembered Noah as well as the wildlife and all the livestock. Does that mean that God just forgot about him and then all of a sudden he remembered, oh yeah, there's a guy in a box that's on the middle of this ocean that I told I'd save his life? That's not what happens. Anytime that the Bible begins to talk about God rescuing people out of slavery and sin, it uses that phrase, God remembered his people. And so if you look at the book of Exodus, and all of the slaves in Egypt are crying out for God to rescue them. They're crying out for God to raise up someone that would lead them out. It says that God heard the cries of his people and God remembered them. He never forgot about them. But God chooses in that moment to pursue action for them. And so what happens? God remembers Noah. And then he does this. God caused a wind to pass over the earth, and the water begins to subside. This is where this story just gets good. Are you guys excited about a wind? You're not excited about a wind. Let me tell you why you ought to be excited about a wind. Because in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, it says this, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was tohu vavohu, formless and void, and the ruach, the Spirit of God, hovered over the surface of the waters." Do you know what the word wind in Hebrew is? Ruach. That God remembers Noah, and then he sends a ruach, his Spirit, to hover over the waters. And then God creates humanity again. It's a recreation story. God pursues his people. He remembered him and he pursued him. God provides, God protects, and God pursues. Do you see what Noah does at the end there? At the end of chapter 8, his family touches down and God says, "Come out, Noah, you and those who are with you." You see, Noah was the only one on the face of the earth that was righteous. What made him righteous? Was it because he was some sort of stellar guy? Was it because he was really good at playing lute? Was it because he was some sort of athlete? No, he was made righteous in chapter 6 because he walked with God. And so those that are with him were made righteous. They were protected and provided for because of Noah. See, the story about Noah is not a story about Noah. It's a picture of Christ. That Christ came and Christ walked with God. That he was righteous. And that he laid his life down at the cross, which we celebrated last week. And he entered into a tomb. If you want to call it a casket, you can call it that. If you want to call it a box that was shut by Yahweh, you can call it that. But 3 days later, that box was opened and he was not in the tomb anymore. The story about Noah is not about Noah. It's about Jesus. And you have been made righteous because he was righteous. You have been preserved because he was faithful. And so they come out of the ark, Noah and those that are with him that had been preserved because he was righteous. And they come to the ground, and Noah had experienced a year of just floating on the ocean in a box. And so he comes out, and what's the first thing that Noah does? Noah pursues God. He worships him. He sacrifices to God. Do you know what's interesting about the sacrifice? This is a sacrificial system that is ultimately given to Israel later down the line, but it hadn't been given to Noah yet. He wouldn't know what to sacrifice in order for God to forgive his sins or anything like that. What Noah does is he sacrifices something that's most precious to him in the moment. Noah has been on the boat. He's been stuck in this box. He comes out of the box to a land that hasn't been cultivated. He comes out with only the animals that he brought with him. And so what's his food source? What's he going to eat for the coming days? These animals that he brought with him. And what does Noah do? He takes some of these things that are most precious to him and he offers them to God in worship and thanks. That's what our worship is. It's a sacrifice of what's most precious to us. So how do we come through the storm? I think we've got to realize first and foremost that God provides. Before the storm happens, God provides. In my story that I gave you earlier, God provided me with a wife who was concerned about me. God provided me with family that was concerned about me. God provided me with a mama that was willing to tell me exactly what to do, even though I was a 23-year-old man. God provided me with a team of doctors that were able to diagnose my situation. God provided me with medication that was able to save my life. God provided in that life-altering moment. But God also protected me through that. I should have died. To be honest with you, the rest of my story is that I had a doctor mistreat me for like 18 months after that. And so for 18 months, my blood sugar was like above, my A1C was above 15, and I was DKA for like 18 months. I should have died. God protected me and preserved my life. God protected. And God pursued me, right? And so when you're in the storm, what is it about your life right now that God is already providing you? It's hard to see God's provision in the storm, but what is it that He's already done for you? It's hard to see God's protection in the storm, but where is it? Where are the areas right even now that He's protecting you? And in the midst of that storm, pursue God through your worship. One of my favorite Nick-isms is that you can't worry and worship at the same time. It's physically impossible. You can't do it. And so when you're in the midst of the storm, Approach God with your worship. Believe that He's providing for you. Believe that He is protecting you. Believe that He's going to see you through it. He's with you in the storm. And worship Him in the midst of that. God provides. God protects. God pursues. Let's pray.